The new animated Super Mario Bros. Movie has been easily the top grossing movie of the year, and will probably continue to be. It's natural that Nintendo is planning more in the Mario universe based on its success, but how could it affect the future of the video games? I have some thoughts, and in this case, I wanted to focus on how the movie portrays the concept of Mario Kart in a more dynamic, action-focused manner, and how I think that could be adapted into a playable form. Obviously, not everything in a movie can translate to a game, just like not every game can be successfully translated into a movie, which is why most adaptations are bad.
Super Mario Brothers. This ain't no game.
But sometimes it can be good to look at one type of media through the lens of another to see how they can positively influence each other. As such, I have 5 ideas of how the recent movie could influence new mechanics and a revamped take on Mario Kart. So, without further ado, let's go! When the gang first gets to DK Island and the movie zooms out to show how all the Kongs race everywhere in custom karts, I wanted more detail into why they're so kart-focused. Similarly, Mario Kart has never really put any story thought into why all the good and bad guys just hang out together and race on perilous terrain. It doesn't have to be anything super deep, but I think just an intro cinematic similar to how Smash Bros. Does it would be really cool. And I realize that's not the best example, because the Smash Bros. Lore goes hard, especially Subspace Emissary and Brawl. But maybe do something closer to Diddy Kong Racing, where there's actually a single-player story mode that takes you through an overworld with each track, rather than just a sterile screen of multiple cups. There can still be a Grand Prix mode, but the story mode would be the main single-player meat to unlock characters, kart parts, etc. And it could divide tracks up into different worlds that you drive between, kind of like how the movie has them going from DK Island to driving on a rainbow. Which, coincidentally, drives me seamlessly into the next idea. This idea is kind of twofold. The first part is that I'd like the open world concept to apply to the story mode. Kind of like other modern racing games, where you drive around and find the races and objectives scattered around the open world, but I'd like to basically see the tracks themselves laid out in the world map. Nintendo has always done a really good job at background detail in the tracks, so imagine driving on, like, Peach's Castle and seeing DK Island in the background, knowing that you can also race over there too. I do think the tracks would have to work a little differently for that to happen, closer to how the old school Mario Karts did it with multiple tracks of the same terrain type. They wouldn't have to name them like Bowser's Castle 1 through 4, but imagine racing up the jungle of DK Mountain from Double Dash, picking between DK Summit from Wii or Frappe Snowland from N64 at the top, and then doing a slalom down Mount Wario from 8, back to a different environment. Obviously, it would be new courses, but I'm just selling the idea here of how diverse these areas could be, while still kind of sticking to similar terrain types. The other part of this concept is for the actual levels to be more open, with more branching paths and changing elements than ever before. I'm thinking something like Beetle Adventure Racing from the Nintendo 64, where there's a ton of secret pathways you can bust through and go over or under other players. Nintendo has certainly dabbled with this idea, as well as tracks that change direction on different laps, but for every Coconut Mall, there's a bland Luigi's Circuit. I want to see a whole slew of tracks that wind around on themselves and are littered with secrets. Some tracks, like Baby Park, just end up being a mess of items flying everywhere because of how many players get bunched up together. But I'd like to see a game where players could go a whole race without seeing each other if they know how to take advantage of different paths. And I know that doesn't sound super fun, but I mean, you could also raise the number of racers. It used to be 8 max, and now it's 12. Bump it up to 16 or 20, depending on the, racetrack, and really let the races go crazy. But this idea also plays off the rest of this list as far as balancing how you can handle the different pathways and having more racers. So let's move on. I think one of my favorite things during the race and the movie was how they were able to activate their own gliders and anti-grav tires. I honestly think Mario has pretty much peaked as far as gimmicks go, so unless they just go a totally different direction, akin to Double Dash, I think they're just gonna have to rework how the existing mechanics work, rather than adding anything new. Gliders and underwater propellers were introduced in Mario Kart 7 on the 3DS. Anti-grav racing was a big hit in 8 on Wii U/Switch, but both of those innovations came with caveats. That being that the player has no control over them. As soon as you hit the water, your little propeller comes out. At predetermined ramps, your glider activates. It's cool, but limited. I'd love just a contextual button, maybe tied to a special meter or a cooldown timer. Like, you can drive in water whenever, but if you hit the transform button, you drive better and faster for the duration, similar to how a mushroom would give a boost above water. Or you can hit the button anytime you're in the air, even a small bunny hop, and you could just take off like a jet for a limited amount of time. But then you can't activate it again for a while, so if you hit a big ramp then, you might be stuck on a worse, lower-end pathway through that section of level instead of taking the glider path. Anti-gravity can be activated at any time on the ground, and it basically makes you immune to hazardous terrain and also prevents you from slowing down on inclines. But again, the cooldown could mean you lose out on taking an upside-down loop-to-loop shortcut because you used it to coast over a sloped mud pit. I think combining the dynamic nature of a context-sensitive button with tracks that have a lot more branching paths could just make for a much more interesting and replayable experience. Sure, the pros will still find the most optimal path and cheese the same boring route every single time to first place, but they'll do that regardless of the gimmick because they hate fun. Tying these previously static mechanics to a button with a most likely shared meter, where the propeller activates underwater, the glider in the air, and the anti-grav on the ground, adds an extra level of strategy to races and makes players have to think on their toes to react to other players, while also making races more dynamic because you're not just scrambling to grab a shell while inching closer to the character in front of you on a straightaway. And speaking of strategy, these last two ideas change how the item and combat aspects work also. Another thing I loved from the movie that doesn't really translate to the games was how enemy carts would get hit and explode, causing wrecks that other racers get caught up in. Kind of like Burnout, I guess. On top of that, there's a few moments when the heroes literally bash into other carts to knock them off course. Both of these elements are mildly represented in games, like the Bomb item creating an area of effect explosion, and the Tanuki tail acting as a close-range melee swipe, but I'm still more interested in making the actual races mechanically interesting, rather than relying more on items. I want to see more of a sideswipe mechanic where you can bash your cart into an opponent at the expense of your current speed. Like, it resets your acceleration, but can skid another player into a wall or banana peel that they tried to avoid. Similarly, I'd love to see full destruction mechanics. Let's do away with the slow, Lakitu picks up the player and drops them back on the track gimmick. I understand the, realism behind it, but it's so unsatisfying compared to a proper explosion. How about this? Give every player a health gauge, which varies based on the cart parts you put together. Heavy carts will have more attack and defense, or health, so they last longer but are a lot slower and harder to steer, whereas light carts have less health, are weaker, but can maneuver a lot easier to avoid getting hit. Different items and track collisions do specific amounts of damage to your cart, and maybe some shortcuts or alternate paths have health regen pickups at random that repair cart damage. Destruction wouldn't be that easy to achieve, but it just becomes an added concern and a reason to drive less recklessly. I don't have any, in-canon explanation for how the destruction system would work. I'd imagine you just blow up and then respawn a few seconds later, but if fans really want Lakitu there, maybe The player ejects before the cart explodes, and then Lakitu brings you back down from off screen on a fixed cart. It's not that important how it happens. I just like the idea of giving more weight to the combat in this series. Especially because my final idea overhauls how items work. It wasn't lost on me that the movie basically just focused on the classic items. Shells, bananas, mushrooms, stars. There's been a ton of bad items in Mario Kart over the years, and I don't think we need any of them anymore. Let's be honest, no one likes the blooper, right? And don't even get me started on some of the other gimmicks like the one-off special items from Double Dash. Honestly, even some staples like the golden mushroom could go. I'll take the more strategic use of the triple mushroom any day. The bomb can stay though. I see that as a big attack item for destroying carts. Make it more rare, but with the highest attack power of any item. And you can keep the bullet bill for people in last place if they get rid of Rubber Band AI. Seeing someone go from 12th to 1st in a matter of seconds because they shoot up the ranks and then rubber band their way past 1st is like my biggest pet peeve in the game. But if you get rid of all the worst items and make players focus more on driving strategically and using the new cart transformation gimmick to get around, I think it would be a generally more enjoyable racing experience. There will still be unfairly timed hits with a green shell, or getting knocked out of the sky mid-glide because you get pelted by a banana, but it's just about balancing that experience. And I can see the option to turn off items being more viable too, because there's more depth to the actual racing mechanics. Currently, I can't play Mario Kart without items, it's just too boring. But if there's more engaging driving and combat mechanics and tracks with more branching paths, it'd be fun to play without items and see just the skill between players. And let the items serve to just be an added level of complication that isn't, totally broken, like a lot of it is now. And that's my list. Obviously, everything I thought of in this video is my preference. Everyone wants to see something different from the series. I mean, I didn't even touch on the obvious next step of going full Nintendo Kart, though I'd love to see that too. Instead, all of my ideas here are just to serve the goal of making Mario Kart a more strategic, but still fun, competitive racing game. I get it's marketed as a casual family game, but that doesn't mean it can't provide something for everyone. Look at Mario Kart 8 and its optional accessibility features that prevents your car from going off the track, for example. You could apply similar options here, like auto melee when carts drive close to you, and you technically wouldn't even have to engage with these features in the first place, if you just want to play normal Mario Kart. I just want to see this series evolve, and the best way to do that is by reinventing it, similar to how Zelda broke its stagnant formula with Breath of the Wild. Even if I'm not a fan of everything that changed to achieve that new formula. The first Mario Kart to try something new would definitely have some growing pains, but I think I've laid out 5 pretty solid changes that would be a push in the right direction. At the very least, it would be a more premium product with more stuff to do than just racing Grand Prix after Grand Prix to unlock pretty samey feeling characters and kart parts. And with how long Mario Kart 8 has reigned supreme, what do they really have to lose by trying something new? At worst, people will just stick with 8 since it has almost every track from the series now, and it seems like everyone in the world has a copy of it at this point. If there's one thing I think we can all agree on, it's that Mario Kart 9, or whatever they end up calling it, has some very big shoes to fill. And I hope they don't just do more of the same with it. Or maybe we won't even get another Mario Kart game and they'll just bring back F-Zero instead. Good joke, huh? There will still be unfairly timed hits with a green shell, or falling out of the sky mid-glide because you get belted by a banana. Banana? Did I say banana?